Hi, this is Evan, and welcome to this episode of Wine Couch TV. One of the favorite spots that I enjoy doing most on this show is my segment called Market Fresh. In Market Fresh, what we do is we'll hit the supermarket, specifically hit the produce and fruit aisle, and identify what's in season, talk about it a little bit, and then of course, figure out what wines are best to pair with it. When winter comes around, I sort of think of two things. One, root vegetables, and two, squash. Some of my favorite starches of absolute all time. Today's focus from the root vegetable standpoint is going to be on one of my favorite things, parsnips. Now, parsnips are sort of like these weird things. They look, I guess, a little bit like ivory-shaped carrots. But what's wonderful about them is they have sort of a sweetness, like a carrot does. They don't affect color, but they also have kind of this wonderful kind of herbal note to it, which is really, really wonderful. When you go to the store, size actually with parsnips is relatively unimportant. You know, everyone would think you would want to get a smaller one. It's going to be, it's going to be less starchy. But what's most important with parsnips is making sure they're fresh. So when you get to your greengrocer, ask them how long those parsnips have been sitting there, because once they get over a week or so, they get to be really, really starchy, lose their sweetness, and are not that much fun. What do I like to do? I look to get the good ones there when they're fresh. Make sure they don't have a lot of blemishes on them or a lot of divots on them, and then you peel them. And then you can cook them. You can either steam them, but what I generally tend to find them best for is roasting, so cut them up in small pieces. And when you get to this part here, make sure you cut out the core and cut around it because it tends to be tough and woody and is good for stock, but not good for eating. And then roast it in the oven, perhaps with some beets and some potatoes and even some squash, which we'll talk about in a minute, and serve them as a side vegetable. They're also wonderful pureed, and you can also sort of find that happy medium and throw them in stews, or take that same sort of slow cooked thing and toss it with rice, as my friend Dan Barber at Blue Hill does in New York, and boy, are they really yummy. Let's talk about squash, then we'll talk about wine. From a squash standpoint, I brought two today, two of my favorites. Once again, we've got our good old friend, the butternut squash, and then our sort of deep colored green acorn squash. Now, while a parsnip has a shelf life, as we referred to before, is about a week or so, squash, the beauty of it is you can keep them for a while. Acorns about 3 weeks once you bought them, and a good butternut about a month or so. What I look for here is deep color, so a really deep green in the acorn squash, and almost an orange sheen on the butternut squash. The deeper the color, the riper the squash is going to be, and ergo, the sweeter it's going to be. And then what you can do is just sort of keep them in a cool, dark place and let them sit. They don't need to be refrigerated. That's the beauty of them. What can you do from a food standpoint? Of course, you can steam them, but with these, I usually sort of cut them in half, throw a little bit of butter and brown sugar, and toss them in the oven. They're good that way. And these, you can either roast them, peel them, and cube them, and then throw them in a risotto or stuff like that, and they're really good. Once again, good for roasting, good as sort of a puree or a mash. Butternuts in particular make excellent soup and are wonderful done as a gratin as well. So what's beautiful about both of these things, parsnips and squash, is that they are both starchy. So you get a lot of rich texture to them, which makes, from a wine standpoint, the need for slightly more voluptuous, richer style of wines. And those two that have ripe fruit are going to pick up on the natural sweetness that they both have. I picked two varietals today, and the first is a Chardonnay. The Chardonnay that we have today is a more premium priced wine from Santa Maria Valley, and it's from the Dierberg Winery, 2005. What I like about this one is it's got some richness to it, it has a lot of texture, but it still has a brightness and almost a sweetness of fruit, which you'll find very much down in the southern part of the Central Coast. Let's see if I'm right. What I love on the nose here is you've got just a deft amount of oak on it, so you're getting just that sweetness of vanillin and maybe almost a light butterscotchy character, but you have this nice, ripe, tropical character of fruit underneath and a nice sort of waxy aroma, sort of floral character. This Dierberg Chardonnay has a wonderful roundness to it, and once again, I think is going to hold up beautifully with either the parsnips and their texture or the squash and its texture, and particularly we'll pick up on some of that sweetness that we alluded to before with the butternut squash. However, much as I like Chardonnay, and I think it's really important to make sure you don't get a too oaky-styled Chardonnay, the best way to go for me is Viognier. We have a 2007 Viognier from Bridlewood, and this particular wine hits the sort of everyday price point, so it's really, really affordable. But Viognier sort of texture, roundness, and almost zofticness make it an absolute perfect match for squash. You're probably wondering why I didn't smell it. Well, Viognier to me often tastes just like it smells, so I sort of skipped that part. What you get here is a lot of rich nectarine, peach, and sort of orchard character of fruit. On almost the sweeter side, a lot of blossom character and a nice creamy, almost vanilla yogurt creme fraiche texture in the middle palate. Sort of Yoplait-ish in its own way, but much more interesting. Again, the texture holds up beautifully with the squash. And that extra added nuance of nectarine or peach means that you can sort of jam in some things and play a little bit more with fruit alongside your squash in a sort of fun winter kind of preparation. Anyway, a lot of fun with squash, a lot of fun with root vegetables, parsnips, carrots, and everything else, and a lot of fun with wine. So anyway, before we get out of here today, our Wine Couch word of the week is going to be gras. Now, gras is a funny term, and it looks like grass with an S missing, but what gras is a French term that means fat. And fat, in this particular case, references the texture that you'll find in a richer wine like Chardonnay and like Viognier. When you go to Burgundy, in France particularly, they're always going to spend time talking to you about the gras of their Chardonnays, because that texture, that oiliness, that creaminess is what really great Chardonnay and Viognier are all about. Anyway, that's all the time we have for this episode. Until next week, go get some parsnips, go get some squash, cook and enjoy. Take care.